So this is one of those situations where if you've spent any time on YouTube or Twitter lately, you've probably seen the discourse completely melt down about Turkey Tom. Allegations, counter allegations, screenshots, interviews, reaction videos, and somehow after all of that, people seem more confused, not less. This video is not about deciding guilt or innocence. I'm not necessarily pro or anti Tom at the moment, and I implore you to hold off on forming a solid opinion on his allegation until everything has been aired out in its entirety. What I do want to do with this video is slow this down and explain what exactly is going on, because once you see the structure of how these arguments are being made, a lot of the chaos suddenly makes sense. Let's talk about credibility, because that's the real fight here. In most situations, credibility is built through openness and uncertainty. There are admissions like, I didn't fully understand this at the time, I normalized things I shouldn't have, and my perspective changed later, or something along these lines. In trauma-informed frameworks, that actually adds credibility, building the accused up as unknowing or not fully aware of what they're doing. Inconsistency is treated as something that often accompanies harm. Tom's response does the opposite. It builds credibility through certainty and volume, screenshots, dates, timelines, repetition. His argument is basically, if this were true, it would show up clearly and consistently in the record. This is a very familiar internet move, and to be fair, it's persuasive to a lot of people because it feels concrete. The problem is that these two approaches define credible in incompatible ways. Tom's attempts to build credibility work so well because he's coming off as genuine and not victimizing himself, providing several screenshots for every one of his claims and painting the accusers of being lying, twisting words and situations into their favor. And to a certain degree, this is correct. In most sexual conversations, we can see that they are initiating these topics. Even in the audible recordings of Tom, they're egging him on, trying to get more out of him. If you know anything about sensitive cases like this is entrapment tactics used on Tom to get more and more crazy statements out of him. We don't have the full phone calls, so we can't say for certain the exact context of these clips, so until we do, it's hard to make a firm judgment on the validity of these calls, and if it was fully entrapment or only partially. Tom never once even acknowledges the recordings of these calls, which is not a good look on his side. Take either of these facts as you will. Nowhere does this break down harder than with consent. On the accuser's side, consent is treated as contextual. It's not just about whether someone said yes in the moment, it's about pressure, expectations, power dynamics, and what felt normal at the time. The claim isn't, I never consented. The claim is, I consented in a way that wasn't fully informed or fully free. In Tom's response, consent is treated as explicit and behavioral. If someone participated repeatedly, didn't clearly revoke consent, used enthusiastic language both before and after the accused events happened, then consent is assumed to be present and ongoing. From that perspective, later reinterpretation from the accuser's side can look like dishonesty rather than reflection. And if these allegations are true, the accusers will have to put in twice the effort to provide evidence in what they've lacked before. This is where Tom's response comes in. It relies heavily on explicit messages to argue agency and desire. And in internet culture, screenshots are basically king. They feel objective, they feel final, and it's easy for people to absorb better than a full essay about how this side is right and the other is wrong. But the accuser's perspective is that those same messages don't necessarily represent internal experience, performance within the relationship, that they hadn't realized what was going on was wrong until later. That's not an argument most people find intuitive, especially online where documentation is treated as the ultimate truth. So whichever side you're inclined to believe probably depends on whether you think messages capture meaning or just behavior, if Tom's side is right or if he's lying. There's a power imbalance that affects how this plays out. One side, the accuser, is speaking from a position of vulnerability without a large platform to reach out to. The other, Tom, has platform reach, audience trust, and narrative control. Tom's response isn't just long, it's exhaustive, and whether intentionally or not, that raises the cost of disagreement. Engaging means wading through explicit details and risking public dissection. That doesn't automatically make going against Tom wrong, but it does shape how the conversation functions. The ball is in Rowan and the other accuser's court, and it's up to them to make the next shot. Tom has strong control over the narrative because of his large audience base, that for the most part, hasn't seemed to care so far in his comments. While others have jumped ship to immediately take the accusations as true, that Tom is a horrible human being and guilty without trial. This is a fine line to walk, and staying neutral until both sides have finished releasing their testimonies is overall the best thing to do in a situation like this, unless you want scrutiny online from either side. I want to end this by zooming out a bit because I think there's a temptation to treat situations like this as puzzles that can be solved if we just look hard enough at the receipts. And that's understandable. Screenshots feel safer than ambiguity, and timelines feel safer than memory. Certainty feels safer than sitting with the idea that two people can walk away from the same relationship with completely incompatible truths. But what this situation really exposes isn't just a conflict between individuals, it's a conflict between how the internet wants truth to work and how human experiences actually work. Online, we want harm to look clean. We want it to be black and white. We want it to be immediate, obvious, consistent, and easy to point to. In real life, especially in sexual and intimate relationships, harm is often messy. It can coexist with desire, enthusiasm, and it can take time to recognize. And sometimes it's only named after the relationship is already over. But at the same time, it's also true that reinterpretation has its limits. Not every bad relationship is abuse, not every regret is coercion, and not every accusation becomes true simply because it feels true later. If you prioritize documentation and consistency, you're likely to see one story. If you prioritize power dynamics and subjective experience, you'll likely see another. And once those camps form, the conversation stops being about understanding and starts being about which worldview gets to dominate. That's why these controversies almost never end with clarity. They end with exhaustion, with people choosing sides not because they're fully convinced, but because they're tired of uncertainty. So, if there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's not a verdict. It's a recognition that some conflicts aren't unsolvable because we're missing information. They're insolvable because we're using incompatible tools to interpret that information. And until we get better at acknowledging that, we're going to keep replaying this exact same drama with different names, different screenshots, and the same breakdowns and understanding. Not because people are uniquely stupid or evil, but because the internet still doesn't know how to talk about intimacy, power, and harm without flattening them into something easier to digest. And that's not a satisfying ending. But it is, I think, the honest one. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time.